Hi, poets. Today we're going to talk about making choices during revision with a focus on thematic form and punctuation. I'm Liz Whiteacre, and I am here to share a behind the scenes with the poem Other People's Pain, which I wrote many years ago. It appears in the book Hit the Ground. This is a collection of poems that explores my personal experience with spinal injury and a really significant injury in 2000 where it was about 2 years before I could walk without aid. So a lot of time in therapy, um, some shifts in how I engaged with the world. I learned a lot, and there were so many people who came to my aid and supported me during that time. This poem, Other People's Pain, focuses on kind of a composite. I spent a lot of time at pain clinics in waiting rooms, getting to know different characters, if you will, who also frequented them, from the staffs to other patients. This focuses on a scene, and I'm going to read it to you and then kind of talk through different options I went through in order to get to this point. So here it is in the final version, and then I'm backing up to share the choices that I made, which I hope might help you think about the choices that you're going to make during revision when you look at poems forms. Other people's pain. This nurse wants to be called Mama Flo, honest. She tells that to all the patients who shift in the waiting room. It seems she always has to get home to mow her yard. Every appointment I'm there, it rains. She laments wet weather and tells whoever will listen stories about other patients. The man who just wheeled out, she drawls to a guy in a plaid shirt. He used to work with me over at the surgery center. He went on vacation last year, hunting with his brother, climbed up a deer stand, fell when he lost his grip, paralyzed from the waist down now. The nicest boy. Nurse Flo shakes her head in disbelief. He told me once he couldn't believe life could change like that in the time it took to hit the ground. So how did I end up there? This is an earlier draft. This is a moment when I was starting to write this scene on paper. It's not the first because I can't claim that, but this is an early draft. And you'll notice that this has most of the elements, but in this, there's not as much space. Um, there are kind of the same length lines. This nurse wants to be called Mama Flo. Honest, she tells it to all the patients. So the decisions that I'm making in this poem and the draft we just took a look at are looking at phrases. I'm trying to help you picture this like a movie in your head. So I'm kind of working with images and actions that make sense and working you through that scene. So a lot of the end lines, if you take a look, are ending on nouns, ending on verbs, words that would provide a little resonance, like when you push the key on the pedal on the piano, and then as you hit the keys, the sound kind of pulls out and lasts longer than it otherwise would with perhaps staccato, where things are very quick and hard hitting and move on to the next. So that was something that was important to me. I did feel, though, that we moved too quickly through this without those spaces or stanza breaks kind of putting it through. And because I'm choosing for the most part to kind of give you a phrase or a part of a sentence that makes sense, when you're coming to it, you can move through this scene pretty quickly in this particular form. When I shifted, and I thought, oh, I'm gonna add some space into this. I went from kind of condensed scene to a technique that I had used in some of the other poems in the book, and that's using the caesura or space within the line. Um, Here, you'll notice that it doesn't feel like a story. It doesn't kind of feel like a paragraph. There are a lot more movements you need to make with your eyes to get all the way through. And although this does slow the reader down, I felt that the reader might have to work too hard. So I am going to read this one just so you can get a sense of my dissatisfaction as the writer of the poem. This nurse wants to be called Mama Flo, honest. She tells that to all the patients who shift in the waiting room. It seems she always has to get home to mow her yard. Every appointment I'm there, it rains. She laments wet weather and tells whoever'll listen stories about other patients. The man who just wheeled out, she drawls, to a guy in a plaid shirt. He used to work with me over at the surgery center. He went on vacation last year, hunting with his brother, climbed up a deer stand, fell when he lost his grip. Paralyzed from the waist down now, the nicest boy. Nurse Flo shakes her head in disbelief. He told me once he couldn't believe life could change like that in the time it took to hit the ground. So visually, there are moments. I liked the last line, that idea of the tumbling, right, in the time it took to hit the ground. But I felt that it was just moving too slowly. This is that quick side conversation in a waiting room that the speaker in the poem is eavesdropping on. And so I didn't feel that there was that luxury of processing in hindsight that was taking place within the scene of the poem. And so I felt that I went a little too far and I had to back it up a little bit. So this shows you that evolution from a little too quick of narrative, a little too slow, a little too acrobatic with the eyes, making the eavesdropper, right? Because the reader is the eavesdropper, just like the poet or the speaker in the poem is the eavesdropper in this moment. To what I felt was a happy medium. Working with the couplets, I'm pumping the brake, but using that little bit longer line and really focusing on breaking at the ends of sentences or the ends of phrases, units of thought that make sense. So that was my thinking with the form of the poem, considering how I'm guiding people through the story in this moment. That's not all that's to it, as you well know. It's not just line breaks and stanza breaks and white space. We also have the tools of punctuation, and we're not even getting into the figurative language stuff yet, and that also can be a guide. So let's take a moment to think about punctuation in this poem, and I can share with you some of the reasons why I chose to leave conventional punctuation in the poem. So this is what the poem is looking like with conventional punctuation. When I'm making a decision about telling a story in a poem, I find personally that conventional punctuation is nearly invisible. We are so used to reading stories, reading prose, reading technical documents, reading emails, reading reports, that our brains process, this nurse wants to be called Mama Flo, right? Capital all the way down to the period, honest period. She tells that to all the patients who shift in the waiting room, period. Our brains kind of process that, and the tools of punctuation are so familiar there, so expected. Don't think about it as we move through the poem. So that's something to consider. Were I to suddenly use punctuation in an unexpected way in this poem, right? For example, maybe the M dash in the last line wasn't expected, but we're used to that interruption, right? That visual interruption for the aside and the time it took to hit the ground. It makes sense for us there. But again, the same reason why I chose not to have a form that slowed us down and gave us so many twists and turns visually to get through the poem. I really wanted to think about how can I guide people through this effortlessly so they feel like they're sitting and getting to have this moment with the speaker at the same time. This was a form that I thought about. This is a remembered moment. It's also a composite kind of pulling different um, different visits and seeing different things at this particular place with some, different nurses, different patients to protect the innocent's privacy. So it's fictionalized, but very much grounded in the many hours I waited in the pursuit of health and pain-free living. So you can also craft a poem that does not have any punctuation in it. And that can also feel invisible and it can also feel um, effortless. So I wanted to make sure to send that message as well. If you have established rules for your poem, the world that exists, and they make sense to the reader, and they don't have to struggle to figure out why something unexpected is happening in a particular moment, then you are guiding them through without creating any sort of friction. So here, instead of using punctuation marks, I did include some caesures. It was important to me in the second line that honest was its own independent thought. There really was a nurse who wanted to be called Mama fill in the blank. And I found that a little surprising at the time. It was very familiar, especially in a place that felt very formal. So it stuck in my mind. So having honest sit by itself with that space until we get to, she tells that to all the patients, was my way of having those moments where there was a period expected, giving people a little space so their brain had a moment to kind of think like, okay, here's the end. Last year hunting with his brother, climbed up on a deer stand, fell when he lost his grip. So the different options for guiding your readers can happen in a lot of different ways. You can use a lot of different tools. And again, in this poem, the speaker is an eavesdropper watching a scene unfold and sharing that scene with the readers. The emotion in watching this exchange is neutral, right? It's more reporting what's happening and then leaving with that bombshell that life can change in the time it takes to hit the ground. That ties back to the the chapbook's title, that it can happen that quickly and it can happen to anyone. Um, and it's such a surprise. And so ending the poem with that epiphany was the intention there so that people think about that moment moving forward, just like the speaker in the poem is thinking about that moment. Why didn't I choose to go with this? Well, I felt that stripping all of the punctuation, removing all of the capitalization except for Nurse Flo and Mama Flo, it was very important to me that readers understood. I had great respect for her, so I wanted to make sure that her name stayed a proper noun. Um, I had shifted the remembered dialogue into italics, which is a strategy that you can certainly use in poems. You can use italics for imagined dialogue, remembered dialogue, internal thoughts. But I felt that this took away that sense of eavesdropping, that this felt like a memory in the speaker's mind thinking back to an appointment. And I preferred that intimacy. Let me go back one. I preferred that intimacy of having it feel like a little story or a little movie scene. So I decided that I wanted to keep the convectual punctuation because that would serve this moment a little bit better in my opinion. So again, here we have the two versions of the poem. I'll give you a moment just to reflect on the differences. Now, this is subjective, right? We all take guidance in different ways. You hand somebody a compass and a map, people are going to use those tools in different ways, especially depending on their personal experience with them. And so you might say, "Oh, why did you make that choice there or that choice there? Why did you abandon that? I like that better." You might hear that, especially when you go into workshop, that there are moments where people are appreciating something, but other feedback you're getting, you feel a tension there because you feel like, well, maybe that choice is cool, but it's not serving this greater purpose. So as you're making choices that are thematic, and I'm using that term to really kind of stand in for intentional, right? The choices you're making, not just in the idea that you're sharing and the words you're using to communicate it, but also how you're putting it on the page, its form, its sound, its breath, how people are working their way through it, can really make a big difference on your reader's experience. And so at the end of the day, you need to, I want to say, be confident. Sometimes we don't know. Sometimes it might take more living before we really know what we're trying to say in a poem. But in that moment in time, you want to be confident in what you want to communicate and hope that the choices you're making in the poem help point readers towards that particular meaning as best you can. And thinking about reader feedback can help guide those choices. If you're like, I'm doing it this way, and everybody's like, what? Well, you might consider, well, maybe that's not the way if I want people to join me on this journey. So we have lots of different options, and I do hope that you explore what these mean, right? We see all of these different punctuation marks every day. And when we start to think about what not just the denotation is, I'm going to borrow that term, what a comma literally does in a sentence. It pumps the brake, or it separates items in a list, or it might be the glue to join two complete sentences together with a joining word. We also want to think about, well, how do we respond to what is also the connotation? So if you have a list of items and you choose to take the commas out and you're not guiding me through that, what does that mean? Or if you're throwing in extra commas here and there when I don't expect them as a reader, you're using them unconventionally. So I start to add in a bunch of breaths, and could that make me respond physically, create tension and anxiety and breathlessness that might mirror something that's happening with the speaker in the poem? You can make me upset as a reader, just like the speaker in a poem is upset. You can also start very frustrated and confused and not a lot of breath, and then you can slow it down using different tools. So I encourage you to explore. If you've not thought about an asterisk lately, do a little bit of experimentation and look all of these up. It's super fun. It's a whole nother video. Our first challenge connected to this topic is a revision prompt. I invite you and request that you take a poem you're currently revising. This might be something you've written recently, or it could be something that you've written in the past that has been sitting in a drawer, as they say, for quite a while, that you're almost looking at it as if you're a stranger to it. So your choice. But take the poem and then copy it and experiment with its punctuation specifically. And then look at the original and the second draft where those changes has been made. Maybe you strip it of punctuation and use other methods to help guide your readers through. Maybe you start with punctuation and then let it fall apart if that's appropriate. So you do you, but mess around with the punctuation and be mindful of how those different choices are going to um, influence your reader's experience. And then the second thing to play around with is the form. You can work with the poem where you've just been messing about and trying different things, experimenting with punctuation, or you can pick a brand new poem, make a copy of it. So you're going to end up with two different versions of the same poem. And this time make thematic decisions about the form. Um, if like my poem, it started out as just like a little box. What happens if you break it apart? What happens if you have really long lines and you shorten them down? Short lines, right? You make them longer. What if you create the shape of a heart, right? There are a lot of different options. So think about what would be appropriate, execute it, and then again, look at those two poems side by side and think about, well, if these changes were made, how is that going to guide the readers through this? And what might benefit readers with these choices? It's important to keep in mind that when you do revision prompts like this, oh, sometimes you're like, no, no, no. Right? So you always want to make a copy of the original. Think of it like a scientific proof. You have a hypothesis, here's the poem this way. And in changing it, you're figuring out whether or not how you had it at the start is the most successful way to have it. And so if the second version just is not communicating what you want to do at all, then you can feel pretty confident about that first poem. If Ooh, right. You see something that you get a little bit excited about, like I did as I started to mess around with the form. I realized that first version did not guide readers through as effectively as I hoped it could. And so being flexible and looking at some different options helped me get to a place where I was really satisfied with the speed that readers were going through that moment with the speaker. So worth your time. You either know what you're doing is the best path to be on, or you get to see some new things happen that get you excited and maybe present a new path for readers in that poem and the experiences that you're putting on the page for them. I hope you have fun with these prompts. I can't wait to see what you create and the decisions you make. And poets, take care. Thank you.